Hey, welcome back, podcast friends. And this is another episode. This is going to be the second of a three-part series that I'm doing on type 2 diabetes. So, the first episode, we talked about just a general overview of what type 2 diabetes is. And now on this one, we're going to talk about all the different classes of medications. Well, actually, we're going to talk about 6 of the main classes of diabetic medications that have come about in the recent years. And as I do this, I'm going to do it all in the same way. With each of these classes, I'm going to just give a brief history of how they came about and then a brief mechanism of action. So how exactly do these medications lower your blood glucose? And then I'll talk about the main issues that each one of these have, the main adverse effects. And then in my next podcast, the third of the three-part series, will be focusing mainly on all the adverse effects that these drugs have. Because I want you to realize that type 2 diabetes is a nutrition disease. And the only way you can cure it is by changing your nutrition. You cannot do it by medications. There's never been a medication to cure diabetes, and there never will be a medication to cure diabetes. And I'll show you why that is. But remember, the main reason why this is because high blood glucose is a symptom of type 2 diabetes. Okay. Although all the drugs work on lowering glucose, that's only a symptom. The main problem is insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is what makes happen. When you keep glucose in your body, keep it high for long periods of time, your body's constantly producing all this insulin. As it keeps insulin levels high, it becomes insulin resistant. That is one of the problems with type 2 diabetes is insulin resistance. And the other one is inflammation all throughout your body. And I talked about that in the last podcast. But the main thing is drug companies, they can't do anything about your insulin resistance. All they can do is lower your blood glucose. And you'll see that they actually, by lowering the blood glucose, almost every one of them does this by either causing your pancreas to produce more insulin, which increases insulin resistance, or by making your cells more sensitive to the insulin, which also it doesn't last for long. So insulin resistance can still build up. And you also get some of the adverse effects of insulin, which is more obesity, because high insulin levels force your body to store fat. So you actually become even more obese. So again, the only way you're going to be able to cure diabetes is by changing your nutrition. If you have a problem with blood glucose, high blood glucose that's causing high insulin levels, the only way to get that down is quit putting glucose in your mouth. And all carbohydrates get broken down to their basic building block, which is glucose. So that means anytime you eat any carbohydrate, whether it's the man-made toxins or whether it's God-made food of fruits and vegetables, all carbohydrates get turned into glucose so they can raise your glucose levels, and that raise your insulin levels and then makes your diabetes worse. Okay. So avoid carbohydrates and you can take care of your type 2 diabetes. So now on with this podcast. The very first drug that we're going to look at, and this is one, these are called sulfonylureas, and these have been around the most. This is the first medication that came out. And for those of you who are on these medications, I'm going to give the generic name and then also the name brand of whatever company put to that generic name. So, and I'm doing this because, again, I've been a doctor of pharmacy for over 30 years. I've worked in the hospital setting, but I also work in the retail setting. So every one of these medications that I'm listing, we sell each of these medications, I would say every single day. I mean, every single day that I work there, we are dispensing probably most of these medications because the number of type 2 diabetics is huge. It's growing very, very quickly, and it's continuing to grow. And it's all for the same reason, because we keep eating man-made products, all these carbohydrates that they're telling us that that's what we're supposed to be eating, is eat carbohydrates. So they're telling us that we're supposed to be eating glucose. That's what we need, and stay away from the healthy, the animal meat, animal fat. That's what the drug companies, food companies, and everybody else is telling us, because they want you sick, because that's how they make their money. Anyway, I won't keep saying that because I've been talking about it forever. So the first class is sulfonylureas. So examples of these are chlorpropamide, which is diabetes, glycoside or glimepiride, which is amaryl, glipizide, which is glucotrol, glyburide, which is glinase, and then there's also a glycamide and tolbutamide. These are all sulfonylureas. These were actually first discovered back in 1942, But then after, there was a second generation that came along, and that was introduced in 1984. And the way that these work is they actually stimulate your pancreas to produce more insulin. So again, all these medications are focusing on the high glucose, and the way to get your glucose down is to produce more insulin. However, when you produce more insulin, you're keeping your insulin levels high, so you increase insulin resistance, so you actually make the condition worse, type 2 diabetes worse. So that's what it does. It stimulates pancreas to produce more insulin from the beta cells, and this reduces the glucose. It also reduces the glucose release from your liver, and it also has a little bit of increase in the insulin sensitivity in your cells. So what insulin you do have there, it makes these cells more sensitive to it, so the insulin can work to push more of your fat into the body. So yes, you're getting glucose out of the blood, but you're doing it by increasing your fat. And the main issue that they saw with these, just like we said, is weight gain. Because by increasing insulin sensitivity, you're telling your body to store more fat. Okay, you're getting the glucose out of the blood, but these medications don't just make glucose disappear. They have to get it out of your blood by pushing it into your cells in the form of fat. So that's why weight gain is a huge problem with a lot of these. So that was the sulfonylureas. That's the first class. The second class, and remember, in the 1980s and 1990s, there were no more new class of diabetic medications produced because there weren't enough type 2 diabetics. So the drug companies didn't think it was going to be worth their time. But since that time, all these medications, all these new classes have come out because of our dietary guidelines changing, where they were telling everybody that carbohydrates are good and animal meat and animal fat is bad. Now everybody's eating all these carbohydrates as man-made, ultra-processed, toxic sludge, and that's what's causing all these conditions to happen. Almost any disease state that you look at has grown significantly, like so steep of an incline of the occurrence of these diseases since our new dietary guidelines came out. So just remember that. So the next class we're going to talk about is the thiazolidinediones. And this is like pioglitazone, which is Actos, or rosiglitazone, which is the Avandia. Now, these were approved back in 1999, and this was a whole new class of medications they hadn't had before. And it was the first one that had been doing that came about over decades. Okay, so this is the first time they actually started coming out with one. And what these do, what Actos and Avandia do, is they increase the insulin sensitivity, and they increase the sodium reabsorption and the fluid retention from the kidneys. Okay, so your kidney, it reabsorbs the fluid in your kidneys, and it increases insulin sensitivity. So just like you would think, the main issue that you have with these is weight gain, because you're putting more fat into the bloodstream and you're putting more fluid into your body. So that was one of the big ones. Fluid retention from these drugs lead into things like shortness of breath and also congestive heart failure. So that's why you don't see these very often, but we still do. We still sell these almost, every week and almost every day. But they definitely had the pioglitazone itself, and this was the Actos. This one specifically really had a lot of issues. It had when they did a study, there was a study that showed it had 63% increased risk of bladder cancer. And this was definitely worse with the higher doses and also the longer duration. So again, these cause fluid retention, weight gain, cardiovascular problems, and now bladder cancer. So that's why these aren't prescribed as much as some of these other new classes that came out after that. Now, the next one is biguanide, and this is what most of you probably know, metformin or glucophage. Okay, that's what this is. Now, metformin, actually, that's been in the literature for a long time. This has been in the literature for lowering blood glucose back in 1922, but it wasn't started using in humans until 1957. And then in the British National Formulary, they introduced it in 1958. And then Canada introduced it into Canada in 1972. But during all this time, we never did accept it in the United States. And that didn't come about until 1994 when the FDA finally approved it here. And the main reason why is because it had been shown through all these years that there's definitely an increased chance of getting lactic acid doses. So that means that you're retaining the acid in your body when you usually work out or anything like that, and you produce lactic acid, and then you get rid of that through the kidneys. if you don't get rid of it through the kidneys, then your lactic acid increases in your blood, and then that changes your pH. And there's a lot of issues that go along with that. But that's what metformin seemed to do, or does. And again, the higher doses and the longer you're on it, the worse it's going to be. Now, the way this works, the mechanism of action for glucophage is it actually decreases your liver's glucose production by blocking gluconeogenesis. And I talked about in the last one, gluconeogenesis means the making of new glucose from a non-carbohydrate carbon source. So that means that when your liver turns protein into glucose or fat into glucose, and that's your body's way of monitoring glucose, and since you can make fat into glucose and protein into glucose, there's no reason to ever eat carbohydrates, which are nothing but glucose. You don't need them, and they cause your insulin levels to go up. And if your body does need glucose, like to replenish its glucose stores, it can get it out of protein and fat. However, that's one of the things that metformin does, is it blocks that, so you can't produce more glucose from fat and from protein. And the other thing is metformin also decreases the absorption of glucose from the intestines. So when you eat carbohydrates, they get turned into glucose. Metformin keeps that glucose, or decrease the amount of glucose that actually gets into your body. But again, the easiest way to keep glucose from getting absorbed into your body is quit putting glucose in your mouth. Quit eating carbohydrates. I know I'm a broken record, but this is the cure to type 2 diabetes. If you really want to cure type 2 diabetes, this is how you do it. You can get off all the medications, and you can have type 2 diabetes no more, just by stopping eating carbohydrates. And then another thing that the metformin does is it increases your insulin sensitivity. And again, this just means that it doesn't take as much insulin for you to be able to stimulate the receptor, so you can put the glucose into your cells, either as glucose or as fat. So again, you're not dissolving it. You're not making it disappear. You're just shoving it in different parts of the body. So it's not in the blood anymore, but it's still in your body. And so this leads into the main issue that you see with glucophage, like I've already said, was lactic acidosis. And that's why it took so long for them actually to okay it here. And this mainly occurs when you already have some underlying kidney problems. So it is something to be thinking about, but it's not a real worry. The main thing is it doesn't raise your insulin levels, so that's good. And it doesn't seem to cause obesity. It just does a little bit because of insulin sensitivity, but since it doesn't increase your insulin levels at the same time, the weight gain isn't really a major problem with this. The main thing is lactic acidosis. And the biggest problem is, even though people are taking metformin, they think that that's curing their diabetes, so they don't change their nutrition. So they continue to eat glucose as carbohydrates. They continue to eat this. Their insulin levels stay high. Well, when your insulin levels stay high, even if you're taking metformin is not going to be able to do it. So you're continuously increasing doses, increasing the frequency, because you never stop the main underlying problem. And that's where metformin is. So if you're on metformin, that's great, but you can get off, but you have to change your nutrition before you can do that. Okay. The next class that came along, and these are the GLP-1 agonists. These are the medications that everybody's talking about right now, acting like it's a brand new medication, but this has actually been out for a while, and I'll talk about that. So GLP-1 agonists, the ones we're talking about is dulaglutide, which is Trulicity, exenatide, which is Byetta or Bydureon, liraglutide, which is Victoza or Saxenda, and lexinotide, which is Adlixin. And that one I don't see very often at all. But these are all the GLP-1 agonists, like Ozempic, the semaglutides. These are the ones that everybody's talking about. They're saying, oh, this is great for a weight loss drug, because what these do is you have natural incretins in your body. And actually, I actually did a whole podcast on this, so I'm not going to go deep in this at all. I'm just touching it. But if you listen to my podcast 14, that is what's up with this quote unquote new weight loss medication we keep hearing about. So I explain all of this in more depth on that. All I want you to know is your body does not want high glucose levels. So it has natural substances, natural chemicals that it releases from the intestines. When you eat carbohydrates or when you eat food, it releases these chemicals called incretins. Okay. And these incretins are GLP-1 and GIP. Okay. Those are the incretins and that's it's glucagon-like peptide is what the GLP stands for. But your own body's natural secretion of incretins do that. They keep food in your stomach for a long period of time because they don't want this huge glucose rush into your body, because that's going to give a huge increase of your insulin, and it doesn't want that either. So, but the GLP-1, what it does is it keeps food in your body and it stimulates your pancreas to produce more insulin. It does both of those. Okay. So, yes, it keeps food in your body so you don't eat as much because you stay full. I mean, keep food in your stomach, but it's also increasing your insulin, which increases your insulin resistance, which makes type 2 diabetes worse. Okay. So, that's how these work. But remember, if you eat just meat and fat, that also stays in your stomach and your intestines for a very long time, because as they go through your intestines, they release hormones that make you continue to stay full. So you can go long periods of time without eating if you eat meat and fat. Carbohydrates don't do that. You get carbohydrates, you eat them, they come out of your stomach and in the intestines, and immediately get broken into glucose and put into your blood. That's what normally happens. So you can get the same effect that these are getting by keeping your food in your stomach for longer by eating meat and fat. And you don't have to worry about this. When you eat meat and fat and it keeps the food in your stomach longer, it also, you're not eating carbohydrates, so your blood glucose doesn't go up. And since your blood glucose doesn't go up, your insulin levels don't go up. So you don't have any of the adverse effects. All you have is that feeling of fullness when you eat real God-made meat and God-made fat. Okay. And that's the big thing that they don't tell anybody. All they say is that you're losing weight because you're not eating as much. Okay. And when you don't eat, when these GLP-1 agonists that we just talked about, like semaglutide, like Ozempic, and all these other ones, and again, they're, Trulicity, Victoza, Byetta, Bydureon, all these, Ozempic, these are all the same thing, that they fix one little thing of your hunger, but they make the other thing much worse, which is your type 2 diabetes. But they have you focusing on the sugar. So everybody's on Ozempic think, oh, this is a great medication. I'm not hungry very more. My blood sugar's coming down, so my A1C is coming down. So they think everything's hunky-dory, and it's not. It's not, because these have so many adverse effects, and I'll talk about all those in the next podcast. But all these work by increasing your insulin as well. So be very, very, very aware of that. And the main issues, like we said, at first you're going to get some weight loss, but as you stay on these, you're actually going to start getting weight gain, because again, it stimulates your insulin to produce, stimulates your pancreas to produce more insulin. And also this decreases your A1C by about 0.5 to 1%. So your weight loss is an average of around 5 pounds, and your A1C only goes down by about 0.5 to 1%. But the main thing, this causes a lot of nausea. That's the biggest thing that people complain about, is that. And this had no effect on cardiovascular disease, and which is the main thing, cardiovascular disease and death. Those are the main things that you worry about when you have type 2 diabetes. There's a lot of other problems, but those are the big ones that everybody worries about. And they've noticed with metformin, this did not change that at all. Okay. And this is important. And again, episode 14 talks all about this, with what's up with this new weight loss medication we keep hearing about. The other thing that we're seeing now, that everybody is trying to get this Ozempic because everybody thinks that's the way they're going to lose weight, is by taking another drug. But what they're seeing is it's starting to cause gastroparesis, meaning it's paralyzing the stomach. And there's a lot of people having adverse effects with having paralyzed stomach. And this is causing all kinds of issues. Again, there's a lot more issues with this also. So if you're taking Ozempic or anything like that just to make yourself feel full, stop the drug and eat meat and fat, and you'll do the same thing without all these problems. So that leads us into the next class. This next class is also, it goes along the lines of the incretins we were just talking about, because when your body is producing this GIP or this GLP-1, that's your body's actually producing this, even though you have a drug company, they'll do the same thing, which actually makes compounds all the problems you're seeing with this. Your body does not want high insulins. So you have a GLP-1 incretin secreted that keeps food in your stomach and it raises your insulin levels from the pancreas. There is another incretin called DPP-4, okay, and that's dipeptidyl peptidase. But DPP-4, what that does is that goes in and that inactivates GLP-1 or GIP, because what it's doing is your body doesn't want a high insulin. It knows that's bad, so it secretes an incretin that will block GLP, and by doing that, that causes your insulin levels to come back down, since GLP and GIP stimulate insulin. So your DPP-4 blocks that and causes your insulin levels come down. So now, since that works by causing the insulin levels to go down, and drug companies don't want your insulin levels to go down, they need that to stay up to get rid of your glucose. Now they have DPP-4 inhibitors. So your own body's natural way of bringing insulin down because of GLP-1 and GIP, now we have a drug that will block that also, so it keeps your insulin levels high, which, like you know, is going to increase your insulin toxicity, your insulin resistance, which makes your type 2 diabetes worse. Now, the medications we're talking about, these DPP-4 inhibitors, are things like allogliptin, that's Nasina, linagliptin, which is Tradjenta, saxagliptin, which is Onglyza, sitagliptin, which is Januvia. Okay, and there's at least 8 others of these that do the same thing. But anything that ends in leptin, anything like that, saxagliptin, linagliptin, allogliptin, sitagliptin, all these are DPP-4 inhibitors. So they inhibit your own body's natural incretin that's trying to bring your insulin levels down. So these actually make your insulin levels go up. And these first became available in 2006. And that's the main way that those work. And the main issues that they see with these is it definitely increased the risk of heart attacks and strokes. Wait. Oh, no, heart attacks and strokes. The rate of heart attacks and strokes did not decrease when they were on these medications. And again, that's the main thing why you're wanting to do this, is to decrease that. And again, they work by increasing your insulin, so it also can make your type 2 diabetes worse. So that's those. The next class is your sodium glucose cotransporter 2, or SGLT2 inhibitors. This set of drugs is called, there's canagliflozin, that's Invokana, dapagliflozin, which is Farxiga, empagliflozin, which is Jardiance, or tugliflozin, which is Teglatro, and we don't see very much of that either. So if you're on Invokana, Farxiga, or Jardiance, that's what these are. And this is actually a good mechanism. What these do is the way your body gets rid of glucose. Like if your glucose is normally over around 150 or 180, your body has a natural mechanism to empty that glucose into the kidneys. But we're actually filtering glucose and blood. You know, that's in our blood. We're filtering this all the time. So our kidneys are very important. They regulate our fluid and electrolyte balance. They regulate our acid-base balance. They regulate our blood pressure. That's the way we get rid of most of our metabolic waste. Because remember, our bodies are making metabolic waste all the time. There's all kinds of chemical reactions going in our bodies constantly with all of our cells. So they produce a lot of these metabolic waste. Almost everything in your body gets eliminated. All the bad things in your body get eliminated by either the liver or the kidneys. So the liver can break it down and eliminate it through your intestines, or it can change it into something more water soluble so you can excrete it out through your kidneys. And that's the normal thing. So our kidneys are working constantly. Our kidneys filter about 120 milliliters per minute. So that's 4 ounces a minute of blood. However, even though it's doing 4 ounces per minute of blood, most of this goes down through the kidneys, gets rid of the waste, and then you reabsorb all this at the later part of the kidneys. So really, even though you're filtering 120 milliliters per minute of blood, you only accumulate about 1 milliliter per minute of urine. And so that's what happens also with glucose. So as glucose goes through your kidneys, it's going to go through the kidneys being filtered, but then when it gets to the last part, it'll reabsorb back into your blood. So the glucose just cycles around. This type of drug, these, your Jardiance and Farxiga and all these, what they do is they actually block that reabsorption. So as the glucose goes through the kidneys, instead of being reabsorbed back in the blood, that's blocked. And so you actually eliminate more glucose that way. And this is a great thing because it doesn't affect your insulin levels in any way. It doesn't stimulate your body to produce more insulin. And it doesn't increase your insulin sensitivity. It actually does it just by helping your kidneys get rid of it. But that is one of the problems that you see with that is by getting rid of all the glucose in your kidneys, you have more glucose in your kidneys, which means you have increased chance of getting kidney infections. That's one of the biggest things that you're going to see with this. But it does keep your insulin levels low, and that's what's really good about this. The greatest results of this is that it causes lower body weight, lower blood pressure, and also less arterial stiffness. So all these things work really, really well because they only work on eliminating glucose and they don't work by increasing your insulin. But there was one study that showed that these medications did cause a decrease in the risk of death by 38%. And remember, none of these other classes they didn't affect the death rate at all. It reduced the risk of progression of kidney disease by almost 40%, and they reduced the need for dialysis by 55% in one study. So these drugs worked well, but the funny thing is, these only lowered your hemoglobin A1Cs by 0.4%. So it didn't really lower the glucose a whole lot, but what it didn't do is stimulate your insulin. So you weren't getting insulin resistance. So this study actually really proved that in order to get rid of type 2 diabetes, you can't just worry about the glucotoxicity. You have to worry about insulin toxicity as well. And this showed that because like I said, it had all these really good positive effects because the insulin levels were not increased. Even the glucose levels didn't drop that much. And the main adverse effect, like I said, was the risk of urinary tract infections because now you're putting more glucose out through your kidneys, and you don't want to do that. So again, if you don't want to put all the glucose out through your kidneys, quit putting glucose in your mouth. But the really, really serious side effect, and that's why these aren't prescribed that often, is they actually caused ketoacidosis, which means your blood becomes more acidic, and that caused a lot of problem that I won't go into. But ketoacidosis is the big problem with this. So it's not all that great, but at least since it doesn't affect the insulin, these are a lot better than these other medications that we've been talking about. So those are the main classes. Those are the main 6 classes of diabetic medications that I wanted you to know about. And what I really want you to focus on is the mechanism of action. How can you lower the blood glucose and lower the insulin levels? By not eating carbohydrates. That's the only way you're going to keep both down. Because if you're on any of these diabetic medications, except the Flozins, any of these other ones, they work by increasing insulin or increasing insulin sensitivity. So even though these show that even though you lower the blood glucose, you still can't reduce the amount of heart attacks or the amount of strokes with any of these medications. And so the whole thought of keeping your blood glucose levels low is the key to decreasing heart attacks and stroke. That's a lie. That's false. Keeping your blood glucose low isn't what's going to affect these. It's keeping your insulin levels low at the same time that you're keeping your glucose low. That's what's going to help with all these other heart attacks and strokes and high blood pressure and everything else that we see with type 2 diabetes. And the way to lower and possibly eliminate your organ damage is to keep both insulin levels low and glucose low. And the only way to do that is quit putting carbohydrates, which get turned into glucose, in your mouth. And all carbohydrates get turned into glucose, whether it's the man-made crud or whether it's God-made fruits and vegetables. They all can increase your glucose levels. So if you keep those out, you'll keep your insulin levels down, and you're going to be a lot better off for it. So remember, diets will only work for a little bit. All diets work for a little bit because it's a change in your system, but it also because almost all diets tell you need to stay, almost all of them tell you to stay away from man-made food and just stick with God-made food. So when you do that, you're automatically going to decrease your carbohydrates by a lot, because if you're only eating fruits and vegetables and getting carbs from that, there's not going to be that many carbs unless you're talking about a really starchy, like a potato, something like that. There's a lot of carbs in that. But green leafy vegetables and all those are going to be fine. Just kind of, again, treat them more like a condiment, so you're not eating them all the time. You have mainly meat and fat. That's what's going to be the best thing. And then you can have fruits and vegetables, just scattered here and there, just to give you a little bit of variety. When you eat meat and fat, okay, or yeah, meat and fat, that's going to stay in your stomach longer. That's going to keep you feeling full longer, so you're not going to want to eat. Then when it does get absorbed into your system, there's no glucose in that, or very, very little. Protein stimulates your insulin just a little bit, and fat doesn't stimulate your insulin levels at all. So you can get the feeling of fullness without the adverse effect of increased blood glucose and increased insulin. So that's why it's always better to eat meat and fat and stay away from these medications, or use the medications just to be able to get off until you change your nutrition. The main thing we want is you want to give your body the nutrients it needs. That's why we get hungry. If your body's hungry, that means you need nutrients, unless you're carbohydrate addicted and you're just wanting to eat carbs because you love that taste of sugar. But as far as your body telling you that you're hungry, it's because it needs nutrients. When you eat carbohydrates, especially man-made carbohydrates, there's no nutrient value in there at all. You're not giving your body any nutrients. And so you eat it, they get absorbed in your body, glucose goes up, insulin levels go up, and now your body says, you never gave me any nutrients, I'm still hungry. So that sparks another hunger. So now you're hungry again in a couple hours, so you eat more. Okay, it's a vicious cycle down. However, when you eat meat and fat, you are giving your body the nutrients it needs. It's getting all the amino acids, and it's animal amino acids, or proteins. So you're getting all the amino acids that we need to make the proteins that we make, and you're giving it all the fat. So you're getting the fat soluble vitamins, the A, D, E, and K, and you're also getting the water soluble vitamins in the meat itself, and you're getting the fat that we need for all the different functions, for energy, to make the cell wall of every single one of our cell membranes, to help make our estrogen and testosterone and vitamin D and cortisol and these important hormones. We need the fat for that also. So that's the best way to do it. If you really care about your type 2 diabetes and you want to get off these medications and you want to get rid of this disease, you have to do it by changing the food that you eat, and you need to stay away from carbohydrates. So I know I'm a broken record, and I will continue to be so, because it's so frustrating that I have to fight against the drug companies and food companies who are telling everybody to eat glucose constantly. And that's what's making us sick. And it's crazy to me that I have to tell everybody to eat the way we've always eaten since the beginning of time. And again, I talk more about this in episode number 20 of my podcast on what makes you hungry and not hungry. So if you want to learn more about that, feel free to go to episode number 20 and look at that. So that's all I've got for today. And I know I've gone a little bit long. I hope this helps. If you aren't on any of these diabetic medications, this may have been really a boring topic for you, but most people, and like we've said, we've seen how we've got millions and millions of type 2 diabetics. So most people are on these medications. That's why I felt like I need to tell you this. And that's why in my next podcast, I'm going to be telling you more in depth of all the adverse effects of all these medications. I just hit on the main ones here, but I just want you to know it is never true that a pill will cure your every ill. That is not true. Good nutrition will cure your every ill, because you're giving the body the nutrients it needs to be able to grow, heal, thrive, and survive. Give your body the nutrients. It's an amazing, amazing machine that when you give it everything it needs, it's amazing at how it can make us feel better, make us feel healthy, vibrant, increase our vitality. It's just wonderful. So treat your body with the respect that it needs to have. And that's all I've got for today. And so right now, thank you so much again for listening. Have a great week. And remember, make simple, healthy choices to live a quality life.